I mean, I want to just focus the discussion a little more on the next few questions in the chat, which, I mean, absolutely bespoke laws and reporting mechanisms are critical. But in the end, legal frameworks are activated by people reporting, right? By women or by victims who are affected. And some of the later questions in the chat refer to this question about how do we remove the barriers to women reporting and taking action when they are sextorted or subjected to sexual abuse by authorities. I think this issue of how better to support women and other marginalized groups who are at the receiving end of this to kind of claim their rights and to take action against authorities abusing their power. Would be an interesting point to raise. And I think it came, I mean, I think Ortun from Bangladesh, you may have some very useful perspectives on that. Serene, I wonder if your response speaks to this, because I think you may also have some very useful perspectives. Thank you.
I would say one of the main things that we found is this role of norms, right? And we know this also from reporting on sexual violence in general, that if, you know, the shame and stigma that the women experience, but then also often is transferred, you know, this is a shame for the whole family, and that puts like an extra layer of pressure on, that will prevent women from coming forward, even within their own families. So we had questions in the survey that asked, you know, did you report this to your own family? And there were very few that reported to their own families. Even less that reported to any authority, right? Because the stigma around sexual violence is so large. The other thing is, you know, so yes, of course you can do something about this, but also to educate on the other side, right? To educate on the, you know, prosecutor, police, every NGOs that work with you know, marginalized groups. That this form of corruption exists, that it is a big problem, what avenues are there. And I think one of the things that I see, at least in the corruption realm, discussed very little is the consequences of sextortion that are, you know, in part the same as consequences of corruption in general, but of course there's a whole set of consequences, you know, going from STDs to, you know, mental health issues to unwanted pregnancies, all these things that we know from sexual and gender-based violence, but we typically don't discuss in corruption, right? And corruption, we still tend to focus on kind of monetary, you know, the economy loses this much. That's kind of the big argument. And I think to include this health and safety argument much more also in discussions around corruption. And I think it plays a role in general, because, you know, also when we see corruption in the healthcare system and women don't use the healthcare system because they can't use it, these kind of things. But particularly in sextortion, I think we need to shift away from this pure focus on sextortion is bad for the corruption is bad for the economy, and therefore we need to fight it, right? So it's corruption is bad for society for different reasons, including, you know, mental health, sexual and reproductive health. And that, I think, also convinces maybe more policymakers that this is an issue that needs to be tackled, and it's not kind of a side note that, oh yeah, when we have time, we do something about it, but put it more at the center.
And critically, this point on educating, on political education, right, on women understanding, as well as NGOs supporting law enforcement officers and others to understand what sexism and patriarchy look like, right, and what the abuse of power and the various forms that the abuse of power can take. And Serene, you also touched on the importance of psychosocial support, right?
Yep.
Over to you.
Look, if we do not understand what internalized poverty is, it's really difficult to make headway in these kind of initiatives, especially to get these women to report. The economics of poverty, the distress, they're just a number of things. In these psychosocial support centers, for example, We had not only the women and girls and boys sometimes that came for counseling, would rather not report. First of all, there's no law, that's already that. Where there were cases of assault, outright assault, rape, and laws are there, there was, of course, a lot of resistance, trust issues, law enforcement issues, stigma as well that is there. But again, I come back to this issue of internalized poverty, which is it's quite difficult to explain it. But it's just in terms of how the person feels that probably this is how life is. This is how things are supposed to be, and this is how I can get ahead. There's also in terms of the environment. We noticed that it's been so normalized, the transactional sex, to get jobs, to get food, to get pads, to get education, to get any kind of opportunity. We actually had one member of parliament, and she's been very vocal about this. She's a victim of sextortion, sexual abuse. Her name is Cecilia Ayot. You can find a number of her recordings where she says that, you know, even as a member of parliament, when I walk into a room, the first thing they see is my private parts on my forehead. That just to give you an idea of, you know, some of the environments that some of these women are actually operating in. So there's a lot in terms of that needs to be done. When we did the study, we actually found that, and this of course is not surprising, that the girls and women that were most vulnerable to sextortion were the ones that came from families where domestic abuse and violence was normal. These are the ones that actually were more prone to sextortion. There was also these cultural aspects of things. Actually, in our report, it was so difficult to frame, where we just put the disrespect of women and girls, general disrespect, due to a number of things, substance abuse, poverty. So there's quite a bit in terms of the barriers. There's one very unfortunate case that we had in our center, where a lady came in with a 10-year-old who had been defiled at one of the water facilities. She actually refused to report. The doctor actually had to go and, because they're bound by whatever oaths that they have, had to go and do the reporting and report the incident. So this caused quite a bit of chaos. So there's quite a bit in terms of working through a bit some of these psychological, cultural aspects. And of course, I still believe that the threat of a law, the fact that the law is there, should provide some level of deterrence. I do remember a conversation that we had with Nancy on the prosecutorial aspect of these kind of laws. And yes, as a matter of fact, Nancy, the Attorney General did raise it with us in terms of burden of proof and the prosecutorial aspect of such a law. So these are some of the things that we're still working on. But government of Kenya has decided they will take it on, as apparently they have a lot more complicated issues than sextortion, which was good to hear. Thanks.
Awesome. I mean, I think so implicit in what you're saying is also the creation of a virtuous cycle. So as much as there's a kind of interlinking barriers and this, you know, this kind of, sense of poverty and disempowerment in a kind of patriarchal and capitalist space, but to create a space for zero tolerance, you do need an enabling legal framework. You do need adequate and accessible reporting systems. You do need increased awareness, but that cycle between psychosocial support, increased awareness, and an enabling legal and policy environment and proper law enforcement is quite implicit in what you're saying and very valuable. So thank you very much, all of you. Rob?
Just one thought that came to my mind when I was listening to the really interesting contributions there from my colleagues, and it's more of a suggestion than a fully fleshed out idea, but it puts me in mind of the scandals that rocked the Catholic Church in Ireland, where a hugely powerful group of people were able to act with impunity in a kind of quasi-open setting, but the norm changes from a few people coming forward and banding together and being supported were able to change the situation in Ireland very, very quickly. and probably irrevocably, which is a good thing, of course, in a relatively short period of time. So I would think anyone interested in how you can support people in reporting this kind of stuff, probably digging into the kind of history and the sociology of what happened in not just in Ireland, but famously in Ireland in relation to Catholic sexual abuses of children, would be a good place to start.